Friends, colleagues, fellow humans, we've all experienced that frustrating moment. That moment when someone's words or actions ignite a fire within us, leaving us feeling angry, bothered, and emotionally drained. Today, I want to explore the possibility of a different reality, a way to navigate life without being constantly swayed by the actions of others, a way to never get angry or bothered by anyone. Now, let's be realistic. We can't control the behavior of others. People will inevitably say and do things that we disagree with, that we find irritating or even hurtful. But what we can control is our reaction to those behaviors. The first step is understanding that anger and frustration are primarily internal experiences. It's not that someone makes you angry, it's that you allow their actions to trigger an emotional response within you. This is a crucial distinction. We are not passive victims of external forces. We have the power to regulate our own emotions. This involves developing self-awareness. Learn to recognize your triggers. What situations, what types of personalities tend to push your buttons? Once you identify these triggers, you can begin to prepare yourself emotionally. When you feel that familiar surge of irritation, take a moment to pause. Breathe deeply. Remind yourself that you are in control of your response. Practice emotional detachment. This doesn't mean becoming cold or indifferent. It means learning to observe your emotions without getting swept away by them. Imagine your anger as a wave. Acknowledge its presence, but don't let it pull you under. Let it pass. The second key to navigating this is perspective. Our emotional response is heavily influenced by how we interpret events. Consider this: someone cuts you off in traffic. You could interpret this as a personal attack, a deliberate act of aggression. Or you could consider that perhaps they're in a hurry, perhaps they're distracted, perhaps they simply made a mistake. The event is the same, but the interpretation changes everything. Practice empathy. Try to see things from the other person's point of view. Often people's actions are a reflection of their own internal state, their own insecurities, their own struggles. They may be projecting their own pain or frustration onto you. Understanding this can help you to respond with compassion rather than anger. Remember, most people are not intentionally trying to upset you. They are simply living their lives, making mistakes, and dealing with their own challenges. Choose to respond with understanding, with patience, with forgiveness. And sometimes the best response is no response at all. Choose your battles wisely. Not every slight, not every irritating comment deserves a reaction. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is to simply let it go. This isn't about becoming a doormat. It's about taking control of your emotional well-being. It's about recognizing that you have the power to choose how you respond to the world around you. It's about cultivating inner peace and resilience. So the next time someone tries to push your buttons, remember these words. Your emotional response is your choice. Choose peace. Choose understanding. Choose to be unbothered. And you'll find that more and more you are. The bedrock upon which the entire edifice of emotional equanimity rests centers on the profound and often counterintuitive understanding that emotional regulation is fundamentally an internal process. It is a paradigm shift, a departure from the conventional, often reactive approach that seeks to control or manipulate external circumstances and the actions of others, and a resolute embrace of the intrinsic power to govern one's own emotional landscape. This perspective acknowledges that true mastery over anger, frustration, and other disruptive emotions lies not in the futile pursuit of external control, but in the diligent cultivation of internal resources, the development of robust coping mechanisms, and the unwavering practice of emotional detachment. It is a recognition that our emotional responses are not merely passive reactions to external stimuli, but rather active creations of our own minds shaped by our interpretations, beliefs, and learned patterns of behavior. It is the understanding that by mastering our internal world, we liberate ourselves from the tyranny of external triggers and cultivate a sense of inner peace and resilience that transcends the vicissitudes of life. We often fall prey to the illusion that our emotional well-being is contingent upon the actions and words of others. We believe that if only people would behave differently, if only circumstances would align with our expectations, we would be free from anger and frustration. However, this external locus of control leaves us perpetually vulnerable at the mercy of forces beyond our influence. The reality is that we cannot control the behavior of others. People will inevitably say and do things that we find irritating, offensive, or hurtful. They will act in ways that defy our expectations and challenge our sense of fairness. To attempt to control their behavior is not only futile but also a source of perpetual frustration. True freedom lies not in controlling the external world, but in mastering our internal responses. Emotional regulation begins with self-awareness. It involves developing a deep understanding of our own emotional triggers, the specific situations, personalities, or thoughts that tend to evoke anger or frustration within us. This requires introspection, a willingness to examine our own patterns of behavior and thought, and a commitment to honesty and self-reflection. By identifying our triggers, we can anticipate potentially challenging situations and prepare ourselves emotionally. We can learn to recognize the early warning signs of anger, the subtle shifts in our physiology or thought patterns that indicate a rising emotional tide. This allows us to intervene before the anger escalates, preventing it from spiraling out of control. Once we have identified our triggers, we can begin to develop coping mechanisms, strategies for managing our emotions in the moment. These mechanisms can be both cognitive and behavioral. Cognitive strategies involve reframing our thoughts, challenging negative interpretations, and cultivating a more balanced perspective. Behavioral strategies involve engaging in activities that help to calm the nervous system, such as deep breathing exercises, mindfulness meditation, or physical activity. The key is to find strategies that work for us as individuals and to practice them consistently until they become second nature. Emotional detachment is another crucial aspect of emotional regulation. It involves learning to observe our emotions without getting swept away by them, without identifying with them as an essential part of our being. This doesn't mean suppressing or denying our emotions, but rather creating a space between ourselves and our emotional reaction. It's like observing a storm from a safe distance, acknowledging its power and intensity, but not allowing it to engulf us. By practicing emotional detachment, we can cultivate a sense of inner peace and stability, even in the midst of emotional turmoil. This internal work is not a one-time event, but an ongoing process of self-discovery and refinement. It requires patience, persistence, and a willingness to learn from our mistakes. It involves cultivating self-compassion, recognizing that we are all imperfect beings, and that we will inevitably experience moments of anger and frustration. It is about learning to forgive ourselves for our emotional lapses and to use them as opportunities for growth and self-improvement. By focusing on internal regulation, we shift our focus from what we cannot control to what we can. We empower ourselves to take responsibility for our emotional well-being rather than relinquishing our power to external forces. We cultivate a sense of inner peace and resilience that allows us to navigate the challenges of life with greater ease and grace. We learn to respond to the world with equanimity rather than reacting with anger or frustration. This is the essence of the first keynote, that true control over anger and frustration lies in managing our own reactions, not trying to control others. Inextricably linked to the first and equally pivotal in achieving emotional equilibrium, underscores the transformative power of perspective and interpretation. It posits that our emotional responses are not merely automatic reflexes triggered by external events, but rather intricately woven narratives shaped by the lens through which we perceive and interpret those events. This perspective acknowledges that the same event can elicit vastly different emotional reactions in different individuals, depending on their unique interpretations, beliefs, and past experiences. It emphasizes the importance of cultivating a flexible and compassionate perspective, practicing empathy, and understanding that others' actions often reflect their own internal states rather than a deliberate attempt to inflict harm. It highlights that by consciously shifting our interpretations, we can significantly reduce the emotional impact of others' behavior and cultivate a more peaceful and harmonious inner world. We often fall into the trap of believing that our interpretations are objective truths, that our perceptions are accurate reflections of reality. However, the reality is that our interpretations are subjective constructs shaped by our individual biases, assumptions, and emotional states. We tend to filter information through our own personal lenses, selectively attending to details that confirm our existing beliefs and ignoring those that challenge them. This selective perception can lead to distorted interpretations, fueling negative emotions and perpetuating cycles of conflict. Consider, for example, a scenario where a colleague makes a critical remark about our work. We might interpret this remark as a personal attack, a deliberate attempt to undermine our confidence or sabotage our career. This interpretation could trigger feelings of anger, resentment, and defensiveness. However, another interpretation might be that the colleague is simply expressing their opinion, perhaps even offering constructive feedback, albeit in a clumsy or insensitive manner. This alternative interpretation could lead to a more neutral or even positive emotional response, allowing us to engage in a productive dialogue and potentially improve our work. The key to shifting our interpretations lies in cultivating a more flexible and compassionate perspective. This involves challenging our assumptions, questioning our biases, and considering alternative explanations for others' behavior. It requires us to step outside our own perspectives and attempt to see things from the other person's point of view. This practice of empathy allows us to understand that others' actions are often driven by their own internal states, their own insecurities, fears, and past experiences. Empathy is not about condoning or excusing harmful behavior. It is about understanding the underlying motivations and circumstances that may have contributed to that behavior. It is about recognizing the shared humanity of all individuals, acknowledging that we are all imperfect beings struggling with our own challenges and limitations. By practicing empathy, we can cultivate a sense of compassion and understanding, even for those whose actions we find difficult to accept. It is also important to remember that most people are not intentionally trying to upset us. They are simply living their lives, making mistakes, and dealing with their own challenges. Their actions are often a reflection of their own internal struggles rather than a deliberate attempt to inflict harm. By recognizing this, we can avoid taking things personally and cultivate a more forgiving and understanding attitude. Furthermore, it is crucial to understand that our emotional responses are often influenced by our own internal states. When we are feeling stressed, tired, or overwhelmed, we are more likely to react negatively to others' behavior. By practicing self-care and cultivating a sense of inner peace, we can reduce our susceptibility to emotional reactivity and maintain a more balanced perspective. The practice of mindfulness can also play a significant role in shifting our interpretations. Mindfulness involves paying attention to the present moment without judgment, observing our thoughts and feelings without getting caught up in them. By cultivating mindfulness, we can become more aware of our own biases and assumptions, and more open to alternative interpretations. Ultimately, shifting our interpretations is about choosing how we want to respond to the world around us. It is about recognizing that we have the power to create our own emotional realities rather than being passive victims of external circumstances. It is about cultivating a sense of inner peace and resilience, allowing us to navigate the challenges of life with greater ease and grace. By cultivating a flexible and compassionate perspective, practicing empathy, and understanding that others' actions often reflect their own internal states, we can significantly reduce the emotional impact of others' behavior and cultivate a more peaceful and harmonious inner world. This is the essence of the second key note, that our emotional response is heavily influenced by how we interpret events, and that by consciously shifting our interpretations, we can cultivate a more peaceful and fulfilling life.